Hello Total War fans, this is Sons of Three Kingdoms. It is a new channel where I will be going through the lore and history of the Three Kingdoms, and hopefully when the game eventually does come out, give you some Let's Plays, whilst basically exposing you to the kind of very deep and rich lore and history behind this incredibly fascinating periods of history. So I have been a Three Kingdoms fan since I was like 5. I've been a Total War fan for a long time as well, since I was 15. So when this title was announced, I got really excited, and I also realized, yeah, for the non-kind of East Asian fans of Total War, this is quite an obscure and esoteric period of history. So I thought it'd be good to kind of give you some background on that. Now, what I'm going to be doing first up is kind of taking us through the trailers. I'm going to take us through the E3 trailer, which is, or gameplay trailer, which is basically around the Battle of Xiapi, and going through the history and lore behind that. So one of the distinctions about this era is that there is the recorded history, which was kind of written contemporary to or in the decades after the period ended. The period is about 190 AD to 260 AD. And then there's the romanticizations, which kind of developed over the next, it's kind of still developing, but it's developed over the next 2,000 years, essentially. But most popularly among the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms. If you've been following the development of this game, this is all things that's been said, so I won't repeat myself too much. So let us go into the kind of video. I'm going to be muting them and kind of talking through it this entire time, and I will pause if there's kind of things that's more important. So to set up this Battle of Xiapi, this was at the end of quite a long campaign. So Cao Cao at the time, he was a kind of medium-sized warlord. Lu Bu was a bit weaker than him, but not too much weaker than him. They fought for months, and eventually Lu Bu had lost everything. So Lu Bu commanded the Shu province. China at the time was split up into 13 provinces. He had lost most of the province that he controlled, and he had retreated to Xiapi, which was the biggest fortress in the Shu province. And he had fortified and supplied the crap out of it, and he was there with it, kind of his like elite diehard core. And Cao Cao put it under siege for, I think it was like 6 months, and he, tried to starve it out. There were many breakout attempts which he stopped, very kind of like exciting edge of your seat moments, including one moment where Lu Bu tried to break out with his daughter on his back to try to seal a marriage pact. That part is more romanticization than history. Cao Cao also flooded the city to weaken the wars, and this would be kind of the final break. So I'm going to pause it a bit here and go through these players. You can see 6 icons on the screen right now. So the big players of this battle is obviously Cao Cao and Lu Bu. Cao Cao is attacking, Lu Bu is defending. Now, Cao Cao is one of the, he ended up setting the stage for one of the Three Kingdoms of the Three Kingdoms era. He is a brilliant tactical and strategic mastermind, brilliant administrator, also on a side note, really good poet. It's not really related to this, but he's genuinely one of the most important poets of the era. He is known as the Hero of Chaos. The reason that he's called the Hero of Chaos, which is a badass name, is because this period of kind of great turmoil saw a lot of the class stratifications in China break down, as these periods often do. Cao Cao he's kind of from a non-traditional family. He's from a rich family, but it wasn't one of the most powerful, respected. He wasn't politically very powerful. His father was the adopted son of a eunuch. So it meant that he wasn't super respected by society, but kind of via raw will, talent, luck, etc., etc., he managed to climb his way up, and his point was that he was trying to build kind of like a measure of order out of the chaos that had surrounded him, and he kind of set up this regime which ended up acting as like as close to a central court as possible during this period of China, and it would eventually end up as the foundation of the state of Wei, which is one of the three kingdoms of the three kingdoms. He also, the title, the Hero of Chaos, actually just came from an actual historical thing, and that is apparently when he was young, he went to this man who was kind of an attraction among the literati. Who the thing about this man is that he's apparently a great judge of character, and he tells you what your character will be by kind of like looking at you and getting a feel for you. So he at that time had been just like a feckless youth. It was recorded that he got into all sorts of troubles with his buddies. He didn't do anything that a good Chinese industrious son should be doing. In one of the most kind of like outrageous incidents, him and a few of his friends, including Yuan Shao, who you kind of saw in the other Cao Cao trailer. I'll go into them, when I go over that other trailer. Him and Yuan Shao had this idea that they came upon a wedding, and they had this idea that it will be a laugh to kidnap the bride and kind of like just make everybody terrified. And they did kidnap the bride, and eventually, they got chased into a ditch, etc. Just very, very not great laddish behavior. So he went to the celebrated judge of character, and the guy told him, "You would be a capable subject in peace, but a hero of chaos." And Cao Cao was pretty happy at that, because he thought, hey, capable subject, sure, whatever, but if shit does go down, if this empire just starts collapsing as it did shortly after, then I will be a hero. So yeah, he's called the Hero of Chaos. Now Lu Bu is the man holding the city. He has the title of God of War. The romantic traditions basically state that he is a peerless warrior. Like, he is just, nobody even comes close to fighting. In the historical traditions, I mean, obviously, because history didn't work on, this isn't the Iliad. In the historical, in real history, they didn't have duels and such. But he was known as just somebody of great martial prowess and kind of a very, very good cavalry commander. But both of these guys kind of come with huge personal defects. Cao Cao is seen often as very kind of cruel, cunning, and just dishonorable. Now that is more of a romantic tradition invention. In the actual historical records, he was seen mostly positively, but basically over the 1,000 years after this, his reputation for political, cultural, and many other reasons just started falling. And in many ways, he's the villain of the Three Kingdoms, even though, as I said, in history, history mostly viewed him positively. Lu Bu, now, on the other hand, this guy's character defects, he seemed to betray everybody. He was incredibly talented, incredibly respected, as I said, great cavalry commander, and he just betrayed every single person he ever went into alliance with or ever served, to the degree that whilst he's called the God of War, another less flattering title for him is called the Slave with Three Names. And the reason they say that is because he will, just pretend to be, he will suck up to people and follow them and then betray them. Why is he called the Slave with Three Names? Well, the three names is, his name is Lu Bu, so his first name is Lu. His second name comes from the fact that he, at one point, was the adopted son and follower of a kind of a minor warlord called Ding Yuan. And when Ding Yuan fought with Dong Zhuo, who is kind of the tyrant that the first trailer alluded to, that I'll be going into later, Lu Bu killed Ding Yuan and followed Dong Zhuo, so his second name is, from when he was an adopted son of Ding Yuan. Yeah, his surname was also kind of Ding. And then after that, after serving Dong Zhuo for a long time and becoming and being his most trusted follower, he also ended up killing Dong Zhuo, and that's kind of his third name, Dong. And on top of that, he just betrayed a bunch more people. So this man, at this point, he was truly alone. He had betrayed and broken faith with kind of anybody who could help him. He had lost most of his province, and he was just down to this last fortress being sieged and starved out, and he kind of is making this last stand. He actually wanted to surrender, but I'll kind of go into that when I go into these other characters, but I'll start playing along now. You see the man with a feather in his hat? So this guy is called Yue Jin. He's one of Cao Cao's kind of more dependable commanders. They made him into a guardian type hero. In history, this guy was more famous as a vanguard, so it's not a big issue. Yeah, he's just quite dependable. Now, okay, let's go over to Lu Bu's camp. This is interesting. These two men that you see here, the man on the right is Zhang Liao. Zhang Liao is one of Lu Bu's kind of most dependable lieutenants. He's not so heavily in the story at this point, but yeah, he's followed Lu Bu this entire time. Famous for martial prowess and again, a very dependable lieutenant. Now this man is quite interesting. His name is Chen Gong. Chen Gong is almost Lu Bu's chief strategist. Chen Gong is kind of the reason that this entire thing happened. So Chen Gong used to be a follower and friend of Cao Cao. Once while Cao Cao was away on a campaign, Chen Gong, at that point, the history doesn't really record why, but he decided to betray Cao Cao. He invited Lu Bu, who at that time was a wandering mercenary general, to come take Cao Cao's lands in Yan province. Now, Cao Cao was away on campaign, and Chen Gong and a few other key defectors kind of rose up in the respective cities and towns that they held, whilst at the same time inviting Lu Bu in. So attack from within and attack from without, and this was almost the end of Cao Cao. He almost lost everything. He had his army with him that was away on a campaign, and not a great campaign either. They were, not doing well, and suddenly he was close to losing his own home base. A few of the key cities and forts ended up being held by his loyalists, and he went back and had a series of battles with Chen Gong and Lu Bu, and it was a very close run, but he ended up winning out. And after that, Chen Gong, the betrayer, kind of just sided with Lu Bu, and when Cao Cao and Lu Bu went to war for a second time, Lu Bu actually just wanted to surrender after a while. When they were kind of in the fortress of Xiapi, Lu Bu wanted to surrender, but Chen Gong, who at this point, history doesn't recall why he hated Cao Cao so much, but he just talked Lu Bu out of it, and he's like, no, do not surrender. So yeah, Chen Gong and Cao Cao have kind of a very interesting history behind them. And I guess a brief word on why, I'm sorry, I can't go into the history of this guy on the right in the blue shirt because they don't ever mention his name. I have a few guesses at who this might be, but I'm not going to elaborate on that. A kind of a brief word on why this armies of this era, even in obviously we're playing the romanticized version right now where these guys are heroes who can kill hundreds of people, whatever. Obviously that's nonsense, but there's a seed of truth to why this happened, and it's because largely the history kind of did go like that. Individual heroes didn't kill hundreds of people, but they and their group of retainers would hold the line for ages, or make vital breakthroughs, or enact feats of just utter bravado. And the reason that happened is because the Han Empire, which is the big dynasty that collapsed that led to all of this, had a series of very small and professional armies. I mean, they were very good. They spent just 400 years beating the crap out of any one of their neighbors, and they kind of set the foundation for China just being a big geopolitical player historically. But when the Han Empire started collapsing, these small professional armies were kind of exchanged with these like mass levies. So basically, all of these warlords began to raise mass levies, and they were just not very good. They were, you know, unprofessional, mostly peasants. Cao Cao was notable for having just like a semi-professional army, and that's one of the reasons why he kind of did as well as he did. He managed to implement a bunch of really innovative kind of like administrative and training systems to actually eke out a semi-professional army. So anyway, the point is battles would end up being not like the professional affairs of Han Dynasty times, which you can kind of think of as like Roman times in terms of, you know, professional legions doing complex maneuvers. They would end up being more just lines of levy going up against each other. Now, when you have that situation, the elite, like the captains who would lead their closest retainers, who were the best armed, the bravest, you know, like the most experienced, they would have to hold the line and break the line, etc., because you can't rely on the majority of the army to do real fighting. So they would have to do complex maneuvers, flankings, ambushes, etc., etc. And you get many periods in history where, yeah, they might not have been killing hundreds of guys on their own, but the stuff that they were doing were just kind of astounding in terms of the bravery required and the kind of like fighting required of these men and their closest followers. And so that's basically why this you know, period of history is so known for these larger than life characters, because they basically had to be for the army to work. And then later during the Three Kingdoms, like you know, when you, as I said, the Three Kingdoms went on till 260 AD. When you get to like kind of like 220, 230 AD, etc., in the historical records and in the romanticizations, you'll suddenly notice like just a lot less characters. And I always thought the actual reason behind that is because the armies had become professionalized at that point, and you didn't need these crazy ass motherfuckers like, you know, holding entire bridges with like 10 other men, or riding into the enemy, like charging into the enemy camp alone just to kind of convince their men to fight. So the actual Battle of Xiapi, there was kind of a climactic end to it, but it probably wasn't this. As I said, Cao Cao spent a long time sieging Lu Bu, cutting him out, stopping breakout attempts, trying to starve him out. They diverted a river to flood the city to weaken the walls. And then eventually what happened in this battle is that most of Lu Bu's camp, I mean, even I said Lu Bu himself wanted to surrender, but most of Lu Bu's camp just, you know, were tired of this and wanted to quit. Chen Gong was stopping them, and a few of Lu Bu's lieutenants captured Chen Gong and kind of like defected and opened the city gates, and Cao Cao's army came surging in. And Lu Bu himself, with his closest retainers, including Zhang Liao, just kind of made a last stand. So it was still kind of like pretty exciting stuff, but yeah, it wasn't a full-on siege assault. Now, you've seen two new characters pop in. That's Xiahou Dun and Xiahou Yuan. They are famous generals within the Cao Cao camp. The E3s have already kind of talked about Xiahou Dun, how he got his eye patch. The only one thing I want to add is that they talk about how he ate his eye in the midst of battle after getting it shot out. I do want to add that he was recorded to have said, this is romanticization, by the way, this just didn't happen in history, but he was recorded to have said when he pulled out an arrow and found his own eye dangling at the end of it, what my parents give to me, I can never throw into the dirt, and that's why he ate it. And then he tried to continue to fight, but was, you know, obviously in incredible pain. They actually ended up losing that battle. It was more of a skirmish. Xiahou Yuan is, he would go on to become a great commander. Xiahou Dun was always a great kind of like captain and warrior, but he never, it's like every time he was given command, it didn't go that well, so he never rose in the ranks like that, but he did end up becoming a very capable civilian administrator. So yeah, and the thing yeah, so the Xiahou Du and Xiahou Yuan, obviously they're brothers. The Xiahou family are related to the Cao family, not like, I think it will be something like second cousins or something, maybe even further out. So when Cao Cao started kind of like raising an army and said, I want to be a hero of chaos, the Xiahou family, as well as Cao Cao's own family, mostly just like followed him, and they ended up producing a lot of great generals. Which is, I think, one of the things I should mention about this era is that um, people, I think, are quick to try to look at this era of history and compare it to, say, medieval Europe or, say, Sengoku Jidai Japan. It's actually not like that at all. There's no aristocracy in China at this time to speak of. China's abolished the aristocracy super early. Like, they abolished it kind of in like 200 BC. So when I say these families, I don't really mean clans. I actually just mean families. And it's also interesting that E3 talked about the, like, influence networks and relationship networks. And yeah, because this is not really a feudal era as you could understand it. It was more of an imperial era, much closer to Rome than to, say, feudal Japan or medieval Europe. So yeah, you can't really say, oh, I'm so and so's liege, I'm the lord of whatever. There's no lords really. So it's much more about the offices you hold, the money that you might have, and then the kind of influence networks that you hold. Obviously, this game looks gorgeous. I love the fact that they use, say, willow trees and peach blossoms. It's very China aesthetically. Now, as I said, these duels didn't happen in actual history, but honestly, it's not that far away. We have stories of, like blah blah led a division of like 100 men charging into the enemy army to try to uh, try to kill the enemy's commander. Uh, I think for the Western fans, a way to conceptualize the way fighting happened and why these characters were so important is think Middle Age Europe. Like when you read about, for example, during the War of the Roses, how uh, Richard III was fighting right at the front, and he had a standard bearer and the knights of such. Or during the Crusades, where you had famous knights like Gerard de Riedfort. Yeah, you can think of it like that. Like it's largely a mass levy army, and then in that sense, the big badass bravado armored dude who knew how to fight suddenly became very, very important. So, yep, Lu Bu's last stand, and he gets captured. Now, I'm going to briefly go over the fates of each of these characters. Well, each of the characters on the Lu Bu side. It'd be too hard to go over each of the characters on Cao Cao's side. That'd be way too much. So, alright, here we go. So after Xiapi falls and all of them were captured, they were all brought before Cao Cao for judgment. Cao Cao is a very Caesar-esque figure in that he loved forgiving people. He loved forgiving people and trying to make them serve him. Another thing is that he was a big believer in meritocracy, which was a very, very, like, it wasn't a new concept to China, but it was a concept that people thought, nah, that's silly. China at that point, they believed that a man's station in life should be determined by his virtues, not his merit. But Cao Cao's idea is that, well, if you have a time of chaos and the people are suffering and there's civil war everywhere, merit at this time matters more than virtue. Who cares how much Confucius you can quote or how elegant the essays you write are? We need people who can actually do things. So he wanted to draw all the men and women of talent to him, and whenever he kind of like captured a city like this, he was always, or defeated an enemy, he was always eager to, he wasn't Caesar in the sense of forgiving his enemies in order to look magnanimous, sorry, He just more wanted to make use of their talents. He hated seeing talent go to waste. He was also kind of like very charismatic, and it's one of the reasons why he became so successful, because talented people across the land, whether they were obviously the great warriors and the great generals, but also just like the best merchants, the best scholars, the best essayists, orators, they all kind of just flocked to him. So he brought each of these men in turn to him when they lost. Now Zhang Liao basically, Cao Cao enticed him to, treated him very well and said, hey, why don't you just come work for me? And Zhang Liao did, and Zhang Liao would end up being one of Cao Cao's greatest generals for many, many years to come. So that was just a good ending all up. Now, Chen Gong was a bit of a weirder story. As I've mentioned, Chen Gong betrayed Cao Cao at one point, almost caused the death of Cao Cao, and was also just the most virulently anti-surrender, anti-peace person. History doesn't really record his reasons, but nonetheless, you can guess that maybe he didn't want to surrender because he's already betrayed Cao Cao. But nonetheless, Cao Cao still enticed him to surrender, and Chen Gong refused. So there must have been some huge personal disagreements between the two. It's the romantic traditions has a history like about how Cao Cao was a villain and Chen Gong saw through it, etc. But that wasn't recorded in history. So Cao Cao enticed Chen Gong to surrender. Chen Gong refused to, at which point the only solution really is execution. So then Cao Cao said to Chen Gong, what are you doing? What's going to happen to your mother? Who's going to take care of your mother if you die? And Chen Gong replied, I've heard that a virtuous ruler would not punish somebody's parents. And Cao Cao then promised to take care of Chen Gong's mom until her dying day. And then Cao Cao said, but what about your children? You have young children. What's going to become of them if you die? And Chen Gong said, I've heard that a compassionate ruler would look after, the future. And Cao Cao kind of allegedly with tears in his eyes, sent Chen Gong to the gallows after promising that Chen Gong's family would be taken care of. And he apparently took care of them very well. Chen Gong's mother lived in comfort until the end of her days, and Chen Gong's family, children, were also very well educated and provided for, etc. Ancient China was a brutal time, and executions of the family members of your enemies were very, very common. It was literally codified into the law. So for him to do that, you must think he probably they probably had some very complex love-hate bromance between them, because this man used to be his friend, then his betrayer, then his bitter enemy, and after that they ended up in this weird relationship where Cao Cao ended up taking care of his entire family. Lu Bu, now for the god of war, what happened to him? Well, Lu Bu said to Cao Cao, hey, you've bested me. You're really good at this war business. Why don't I come work for you? I am the best cavalry commander in the world, and you are like a peerless, infantry commander. If I was to work for you, you would conquer the whole world. And Cao Cao was apparently quite swayed by that. But then Liu Bei, who is, you don't see on the screen here, but he is one of the other kind of founders of another of the three kingdoms, who was working for Cao Cao at this time, basically said to Cao Cao, hey, remember what happened to every single person that Lu Bu has ever worked for? He's ended up killing them. So Cao Cao had Lu Bu executed, and thus fell the god of war. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope that was a bit informative. I'm going to be going through the other videos, the other trailers as well. Hopefully they won't be this long, because this is a long video. It's the first one, so I had a lot to go through. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you.